Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Joel, and I'm here with Booktopian Shanu and author and recovering doctor Yumiko Kadota to talk about her book, Emotional Female. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
I hope you don't mind being called recovering doctor.
No, that's okay. I think that's the en vogue term for it these days.
So that sort of gives a bit of a spoiler for what the book is about, but can you tell us a bit about how the project came about?
Sure. So I guess I am still a doctor.
Yes.
Have been for just over 10 years now. But 3 years ago, I decided to walk away from the public hospital system. I was training, hoping to become a surgeon, but eventually it just got a bit too much. And, well, that's a bit of an understatement, isn't it? It got way too much. Burnt out, became very, very physically, mentally unwell. So I decided to leave, and when I got a little bit better, I decided to write a blog post about it, and it ended up being read by a few more than the 11 subscribers to my blog. Yeah, a few more people other than my family and friends read it and ended up in the news. And that's how a book opportunity came up. And then I ended up writing a book about it to extend from that blog post.
Very exciting. And the title, Emotional Female, can you tell us a bit about how that came to be the name of the book?
It's actually something that I got called when I was working. So thanks to the asshole who called me that, because they gave me an awesome title for my book. I was on call at the time for the hospital, and I got rung at 3 o'clock in the morning about something that was totally not urgent at all, even though I was on call for emergencies. And so I started politely, and it escalated a little bit to the point where I said, look, don't do this to doctors who are on call, because I didn't want anybody else to be called at that time, because we're all so overworked and so sleep deprived, and it really does wreck your week when you get called in the middle of the night and your sleep gets disrupted constantly. So I said it to stick up for myself and for my fellow registrars who do that sort of work. And I got called an emotional female for saying that. So that's one of the many kind of things I discuss in the book that affect women in medicine in particular, but I'm sure women in other industries can relate to being called emotional. It just seems to be a label that gets stuck exclusively to women. So that's how the title came about.
Yeah, and it's seen as exclusively a negative thing when you're in an industry that is caring for people.
Yeah, exactly.
And presumably most people get into it to look after people.
Well, yeah.
And somehow being emotional is a bad thing.
Yeah, it's seen as kind of a weakness. So I thought I would reclaim it, just like Hillary reclaimed a nasty woman. I'm emotional and I'm proud of it. I think it's what made me a better doctor. So I'm okay. Maybe not at that time. It actually made me even more emotional. I was so angry being called that I couldn't get back to sleep. But being emotional definitely is a good thing, especially if you're in a caring industry like medicine, when you're looking after people who are sick or injured. It
reminds me, in the book you talk a bit about how your excellent memory was a huge help for you in medical school when you were having to learn all this material. And you talk about how emotions helped you remember things. And I thought, I'm not sure if you intended for that to tie into the overall theme of the book, but I thought it was fascinating, this idea that, you know, you paid attention to where you were and the senses of it, but also how you were feeling. Yeah. And I thought, it's weird that emotion is so tied into memory, which is so important for doctors. It's also so important for people to be emotionally aware and compassionate, and yet it's considered a downside.
Yeah, it wasn't a deliberate connection to the title. I did it more to kind of say, I guess I wouldn't say hate, but it was a bit of an advantage for me to have a good memory early on, because it meant that I could do lots of other things and not have to study so hard. But it also meant that other people didn't like that. They were like,
how do you know all this? How can you remember all this? And why aren't you spending all the same time I am?
Well, yeah, it actually got cut from the book. But there was a student a few years junior to me who said, oh, I heard that it's because you're manic. That's why you can do all this stuff, because you don't sleep. And I just thought, just don't why does somebody who is productive and can do lots of stuff suddenly get called manic? You know, just don't use words like that lightly.
Yeah, especially if they're also a medical student who,
Well, yeah.
you know, is going to be treating someone at some point.
Yeah.
And will go through a rotation, I'm assuming, in psychiatrics.
Well, exactly. Just, at the
very helpful,
time,
is it?
I remember thinking, oh, let's not use psychiatric terms casually like that. That's not cool. It didn't end up in the final version of the book. You know, it did go through a few rounds of editing, but I do remember things like that being said even from a very young stage. So I'm like, oh, haters everywhere.
And I think that's the thing that's going to surprise a lot of people when they read the book. And we were mentioning just earlier when we were talking that it's really helpful to have the timelines put into the book, because a lot of this stuff, you know, a lot of the stuff is very familiar to, I'd say, a lot of women, but also some of the things in here, you know, to a lot of people would just seem something that would be very archaic, and that might have happened, you know, to women 30 or 40 years ago, not 3 or 4 years ago, which is, you know, when a lot of this, you know, in the last 10 years, when a lot of this was happening. So
it's baffling, isn't it? Like, even the fact that we were not allowed to wear pantsuits. You know, there are some surgeons who are so old school that they believe that women should wear skirt suits. And so it was a big no-no to wear pantsuit to an interview.
Yeah.
So I remember being told that and thinking, okay, I better go out and buy a skirt suit because I didn't have one, to all of these interviews that I'd have to go each year to get a job.
Which is crazy. That's the other thing I would love, I thought would be fascinating to lots of people who don't really have a lot of connections to the, you know, to surgery or to, you know, hopefully in their lives they don't have much need of going, getting, you know, having a surgeon operate on them. But can you tell us a little bit about the this hierarchical structure, this ladder, as you call it, and sort of that grey area where you found yourself in when you weren't on the, I feel like saying the program sounds like a cult.
It was deliberate calling it the program. Yeah, because we were so obsessed with it, you know. So when you finish medical school, so there are undergraduate and postgraduate medical schools. I went to undergraduate school, and after you finish studying, it's usually about 4 to 6 years. You go into the public hospital system to train. You do a year of internship, and then you do 1 or 2 years as a resident, and then next level is registrar. And then from there, you apply for a training program in your chosen specialty. So for me, I really wanted to do plastic surgery. So I applied for the program a couple of times. And you need to officially be chosen onto that program in order to succeed and finish your specialty training. So that was the that grey area that I was in. And until you're on that program, you know, you really have to be on your best behaviour. You're really reliant on your senior colleagues to give you good references to proceed. So it's a very high pressure situation.
Yeah, so it's basically interview based. So it's not, you can't just sit an exam and the first 10 people that get the best results get in, right? There is a lot more to it than that.
There are a few different things that they assess. So they look at references, they look at your CV, and then there's an interview as well.
Yeah, wow.
It's like being in permanent sort of review, you know, for a new job.
Yeah, it's exactly like that.
Even though you've been at medical school and been training for, 8-9 years by that point.
Yeah.
And you were performing so many surgeries solo.
Yeah, I was at that stage already. When you go to medical school, you have this idea that being a doctor might be a secure job, but there's no job security at all because every single year you have to reapply. It's not a rolling contract. You know, the contract is only 1 year at a time. Wow. So it's every single year that you're sitting these interviews.
I think a lot of people just wouldn't think about that because obviously most people, when they interact with a doctor, it's going to be a GP. And that GP could be at a medical practice where they could own it, or they could be there for 20 years or something. But
when you first start out, it's every single year that you have to prove yourself, and
that itself just must be very stressful.
Yeah, it can
be. That uncertainty, let alone it seemed like, you know, we won't go into too much spoilers, but it seemed like
spoilers. That's really rough.
It seemed like when things were getting really tough, you didn't actually have a professional organisation that you could turn to that was actually there to support people the doctors that hadn't yet got onto the program. Yeah. Has that changed at all in the last couple of years?
It hasn't really changed. I mean, the college there are different colleges for the different specialties, and they look after trainees. But unless you've been accepted onto that training program yet, you're not really owned by anyone as such.
Wow.
The hospital does take some responsibility for the junior doctors. It tends to be more for the first 2 years. So if you're an intern or a resident, in my experience anyway, it seemed like they were well looked after.
Yep.
But once you're in that kind of unaccredited registrar stage, it's very unclear who looks after that group of people. So I think that group in particular is a very vulnerable group of doctors.
That really came through. And it reminded me, considering what's happening in the news at the moment in Parliament House.
Yes.
In what I've heard about that is that Parliament House, you know, the staffers that work for particular MPs and ministers, there is no HR in Parliament House.
Yeah.
You know, they live in this grey area where the people who they're trying to impress are the same people who decide whether or not to take their complaint seriously. There's no separate hierarchy for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how it felt reading this book.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, because it just kind of makes people so vulnerable to exploitation when that's the setup.
Yeah.
There's no kind of impartial in-between person or an HR. I mean, there is an HR department, but they were just kind of disinterested, really.
And also all the incentives are stacked to mean that you don't seek them out because you don't want to make trouble,
yes, right? Yes. So most doctors wouldn't even bother going to HR, because if that got back to the senior colleagues, then that's not going to be good for you.
Yeah, it just sounds. I mean, that as we get more and more into the book and all of the experiences, you know, and it's not like you had everything was terrible. You had, you know, you loved medicine, right? That's why you kept doing it.
Yeah.
And you had some great experiences with some really great people that like gave you some mentoring early on, and you know, and clearly you took that on board, and you were then mentoring younger doctors as well. But it's just, I think that's what, when you get to the heart of the book, that's what makes myself and certainly the other people I know that have already read it so angry, is just how like the system allowed people to do the wrong thing, and then threw out all these people that were brilliant and who could have done amazing things for all of us, and we will just never know. We're just never going to know.
Yeah, I had this conversation with somebody else recently. We never find out what happens to people who leave.
Yeah.
I guess it's just this idea of a survivorship bias, where the people who stay dictate what continues to happen, because nobody ever talks to the people who leave.
Left, yeah.
I mean, sure, you get this kind of form that you fill out that gets sent to HR about whether you want an exit interview and so on, but no one ever ticks it. I was just like, oh, no way. I don't want anything to do with this hospital anymore. I'm not interested in going back and having a chat about all of this.
Yeah.
And I honestly didn't hear from anyone after I left that hospital. More than a year later, well, actually, when the blog post entered the news, funnily enough, I got an email from the hospital saying, "Would you like to come in for a chat?" And I just thought, oh, too late.
Yeah.
Too late now.
You can just read my blog post. It's all there.
Exactly.
If you want to know what happened, there it is.
Yeah.
You don't need to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested to see how much you thought. I mean, the problems in that you outline in the book are obviously systemic, and there's a lot of sexism and racism and other sort of systemic problems. But there's also just the problem of having this hothouse of extremely competitive, intelligent people who are hyper-focused and hyper-competitive with each other in this supposedly hierarchical system, which is not really hierarchical. That is still about who you know and who you can impress.
Absolutely.
So it's this a lot of soft skills where you're also tricked into thinking it's a ladder, you know. Is that, how much of it do you think is just the nature of having doctors all in one place versus
you know
system?
What, that is definitely a good point, because we're all type A personalities. We all want to win. We all want to get ahead. The competitiveness is what pushes people on and achieve great things, but sometimes it means that it's a bit of a dog-eat-dog kind of environment. And like you say, it's not really always based on merit. I mean, I didn't put this in the book probably for legal reasons, but there is a character called Yoni and Dr. Whiteley, and that experience was quite interesting because this is a female surgeon and a fellow female registrar, and she got favoured over me. This isn't in the book, but this girl has a sister who is the international buyer for a high-end European luxury brand that surgeon happens to love. So that senior surgeon got early access to things and staff discounts and things, and I just thought, well, what can I possibly offer? You know, I mean, I worked at Mimco when I was in that uni. Certainly don't have that staff discount anymore, but, you know, there were little things like that. I didn't put in all of these details because I didn't want to come across as too petty or to nitpick every single thing that happened. But I just felt like things like that definitely were involved. There's, you know, it's not exactly bribery, but it's kind of indirect bribery, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, and it's,
when you have that kind of advantage.
Also, it's covered up by the fact that there's this supposedly merit-based system. You know, there are other types of hierarchy within other organizations that are more explicitly about sucking up to your boss and finding ways of like getting ahead of other people, where people don't really think. But when you have something that's explicitly called the ladder, you would think
exactly.
that it's a ladder you can climb up.
Yeah, and I honestly could not offer a discount on an amazing bag. So
you could only offer your own amazing skills and work ethic, which are, you know, and I think that's what really again, is another thing that just makes, you know, made me angry reading it, is like, it should be enough. Like you can see how much you love your job and how good you were at it, and how like and also you made all of the surgeries that you did so compelling.
Oh,
like it was like, you know, like I don't read a lot of, a huge amount of nonfiction, but reading through this, it was like every time you came across a surgery, I felt like I was watching you talk, you know, compare yourself to Christina Yang, or like watching the like good parts of Grey's Anatomy where they're doing these like really complex things. And I was really like on my edge going, is it going to be okay? Is the finger going to like be all right? Like what's going to happen? And, you know, and you can't write like that if you don't absolutely have a passion for what you're doing. So again, like I said, I think that's the thing that just kept every time. It's just such a shame that, you know, this happened, and that that unfortunately it feels like it's kept happening because there hasn't been a change yet. What are you hoping that people are going to get from this book, or what do you hope will come out of you having released this as a book to the world?
I just hope that it contributes to cultural change in the hospitals. It's something that will take a long time. It's really hard to change culture. You know, I do kind of briefly mention all these campaigns that the different colleges and associations launch, but it kind of feels like redesigning the wheel sometimes. You come up with a campaign and there's a lot of energy behind it and lots of well-meaning people, but somehow it gets forgotten about, and then a few years later another wellness campaign is, you know, hot and happening. So I think that it will take at least, I reckon, like 10 or 20 years before we see any kind of change. But I think things like this, I think sharing lived experience can be powerful. And I think that, especially in the medical profession, there is kind of this kind of professional code of secrecy where we don't talk about things publicly. So I knew there was a risk in writing the book. I didn't want to kind of make the profession look bad in any way. But until people talk about it, it's just going to be another dirty secret that gets brushed under the rug and nothing's going to change. And I think that, you know, my book is not unique at all. The only thing unique about it is that I've kind of put my face out there, because most people wouldn't really do that. Yeah. And if I was still in the system hoping to progress, there's no way I would have done this. Yeah. But because at the time I chose to walk away, it was easy for me to say, you know what, I'm happy to tell anyone who cares to listen that this is what happened to me. And, you know, it might encourage more people to speak up about it, or it might even give people courage to leave if they're having a really hard time, because I don't think anyone should really have to suffer like that. You know, one of the memes I used for my blog post was one that read something like, you know, don't kill yourself over a job that would replace you within a week if you drop dead. Yeah. We just work so hard sometimes for something, and you think, well, what are you doing this for? Yeah. So hopefully by reading the book, someone might kind of stop and reevaluate what's going on and try and prioritize themselves a bit more. Because I think, especially in a service job like this where you're constantly looking after other people, it's so easy to forget about yourself. So I hope that people kind of feel that it's okay to put yourself first, especially when it's your health.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so well said. And it really feels that, you know, that entrenched hierarchy and the fact that it's so hard and has been hard for a long time means that, you know, the incentives are not there for senior consultants to make it any easier. Because you say again and again in the book, you talk to someone and they go, oh yeah, I remember it was really hard. I blocked out all that time in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of go, yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
that should be a warning bell for you, not just a, we'll keep going then.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was so curious about. I mean, you make a good point that, you know, the hospital you ended up working in with the hours that to most people would just be like, how is that even legal that you could work? Was it like not more than 19 days straight without a break on 24-hour, like being on call for 24 hours? Like, how is that even something that's illegal in Australia? It sounds like something that just wouldn't be allowed to happen. Is there what is the reason that these senior consultants, or what is the reason that whoever was doing the rostering gave for? Like, why is that a thing that happens in the world of medicine?
I guess it's the same excuse that keeps being used. You know what Joel was saying before about how it's always been done that way before, so no one bothers to change it. So I remember going, did the last person do this? How did someone possibly accept it? You know, there's 2 registrars. Why wasn't it divided equally? Why is one person doing 10 out of 14 and the other person does 4? It just didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't really want to complain because, you know, I needed to get my references for that year's application. So I held back a lot until I started to feel physically unwell. And that's when I decided to talk about the roster and try and get it changed. I mean, in the end, it was futile, but it was crazy, that roster. I just don't know how it ever it ever got approved in the first place.
That's right. And numbers of people looked at it, and I mean, a lot of the people that you went to, other doctors were like, that is not okay, you need to say something. But like, as you said,
happened.
You can't.
Nothing
you
happened.
did say something and nothing happened.
And they're just like, oh, well, if you can't handle it, if you can't handle pushing your body beyond, I mean, you can handle it. You've been a doctor, you did all the training, you've done all the hours, of course you can handle it, but you shouldn't have to handle it.
Yeah, that line you say later in the book, something about the solution to the canary in the coal mine is not to make the canary stronger.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, the coal mine is still pretty toxic.
Maybe do something about it.
Yeah.
They don't seem to listen to the warnings.
And I think that in some ways I was disadvantaged because I could do more surgeries. The thing is, previous registrars who had done that roster didn't have to stay back late and operate on their own because
they
didn't
have the skills, right?
You'd
actually hurt yourself by being too good.
Well, I was like, I kind of wish that I didn't know how to do the surgery, because then I could say, I don't know how to do this. I need someone to come in and help. And then the operation would have taken place during reasonable, civilized kind of business hours, not in the middle of the night or on the weekend when there's not enough staff around. So I think sometimes that was tricky, because obviously I wanted to impress my boss and say, yep, no worries, I will do this. I know how to do this operation. Leave it with me, all good. But then there were other times when I went, oh, if I had been a bit younger or a bit more junior doing this job, like some of my previous colleagues, then this definitely wouldn't have happened.
That's right. They would have had to come in because they couldn't leave you alone.
Yeah.
But they could leave you alone.
But that's a terrible incentive too for unaccredited registrars.
It is.
To be in a situation where the better you get at it, the more incentives there are for them to leave you there.
Well, well, exactly. Yeah, because you're there to provide a service, and they love it because they don't have to come in.
And the better you are at it, the more they want you to stay, and the more work they want you to do.
Well, yeah, and you get a lot of positive reinforcement, because they say, oh yeah, it's so awesome, like, well done, oh, that's great that you were able to do that operation. So you feel good when you do it, but then at the same time you're exhausted, and you know that you're helping out and you're making life easier for other people, but then you're kind of suffering.
Yeah, but there's in the end, where did that get you? It wasn't great.
Yeah.
And and it's wonderful that you were able to talk about that in the book, because I think that would be very helpful for a lot of other people who will read that and may not have the same, they might have the same kind of situation as you, but might be a completely different situation. But I think everyone can recognise a point in which, they got to where they just needed to have, they needed a complete break, and unfortunately your break was forced on you by circumstance. But I think being so open about having the clinical depression and all of the treatments you tried and go through, and sort of, your journey, that journey in the last part of the book, I think gives hope to other people as well, that no matter how dark something can get, and you really did go through some dark times.
I did.
You know, that there is a way out, and we
Yeah.
should make clear to people
yeah.
there is a happy ending.
Yeah, I'm alive. I'm happy.
Yeah.
My life is much better now. But I think definitely something I wanted to do was to destigmatize mental illness. I think a lot of people look at successful people and think, oh, they've never had any kind of issue, you know, but it's just so common. I remember when initially I didn't even want to admit that I had a mental illness or talk to any friends or family about it. But once I did, I was surprised by how many people experience similar, you know. I have friends going, oh yeah, I'm on an antidepressant for this, or I have anxiety. It's actually really common. And I think the more open we are about it, the more we can accept it and help other people talk about mental illness as well. And I think, you know, I like the quote, you know, check on your strong friend, because it's always the strong people who you think are okay. But sometimes it's just it's a front.
It's a front.
And you just never know what people are going through. So to be able to talk about mental health was something I think that was important to me.
And particularly interesting in that, you know, hothouse A-type world as well, that you say in the book, how doctors have a very negative attitude towards recognizing
like
mental
being in the
illness
army.
in each other.
Mm-hmm.
You can have people who are trained psychiatrists, but if someone else has someone of their colleagues has a mental illness, that they are
it's
harsh
like a double standard.
Do you think that's just cultural?
Definitely cultural. It's funny because like we all study psychiatry in medical school, and we're very understanding of patients, but we don't have that same compassion for our colleagues. I just don't understand that. Yeah.
You think you can just tough it out somehow?
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to you.
It did feel like Survivor sometimes. Yeah.
Rough. Wow.
What do you call that night? The tribal ceremony?
Oh yeah, tribal council.
Tribal council, that's right. Yeah, I didn't survive tribal council.
I think you actually did. I think at the end of the day you did, right? I think that's
I left
the
the
island.
No one wants to be that guy.
Yeah,
that
I don't
won
want to
that
be
first
on that
season,
island.
Right?
No.
Was that rich guy or something? No one wants to be him. And the other thing that makes me so sad is that how hard it was for you as a woman to, which we haven't, I mean, we sort of spoke a little bit, but that's the whole book's called Emotional Female, but like...
I forgot about that.
You know...
There's so many issues.
In the medical profession, especially when you get to surgery. And again, it's again a difficult thing because a lot of people might just see doctors, and when they see them, they're seeing their GP, which obviously more women go into because of family, and, you know, the hours can be better.
Yes.
And then when you get to surgery, sometimes you don't even see your surgeon, or you're so hopped up on drugs you have no idea who operated on you.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what I even want to ask about this, but I just wanted to say that it was not fair. It's not fair. And I really hope that, I know you said you're doing a lot of events with women, and that's fantastic, but I really want all men, to read this.
I hope men will read
this
the book. Yeah.
And whoever has to give it into any man they knows hands, because
I will definitely be pushing it into the hands of men I know.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those books that obviously it has more application to women because it's your story and you're a woman.
Yeah,
and
more
there
women
are
will relate to it, obviously. Yeah.
Systemic issues about sexism in medicine, but there are still plenty of issues that were very, very recognizable to me in my life in this book. It's not like it's not recognizable.
Yeah.
Recognizable to me and to all the women in my life. So I do think men should read it, and it would be more impactful, I hope, if men read it.
I hope so. And also the mental health part, I think, would be good for men to read as well, because there's so much toxic masculinity and pressure for men to be strong. So I think that the more men kind of consume things about mental health, I think the better. I think that it's, you know, suicide among men is a big issue in Australia, so especially in rural communities. So I think that I think if men can read more about mental health, that's also a good thing as well.
And reclaiming emotional is important for men too, I think, is that men don't get called emotional.
Yeah.
But
it's a good thing.
It's because they suppress it so much that in most cases that they're not even allowed to be defined as emotional.
Somehow someone yelling at someone, and you know, which happens a lot with a lot of men yelling in the book.
There's a lot of yelling in the book.
Or a surgeon stomping on someone's foot during said, whoa.
Somehow that's not emotional.
Yeah.
When they say emotional, they mean like
Anger.
Sad.
Women, yeah.
Upset.
Yeah.
They don't mean angry.
No.
Which is just as much emotion as any other.
Yeah. But yeah, so they're just,
Yeah.
they just sort of, I'm like, do you not understand the meaning of the word emotional?
Yeah.
It's really an odd thing.
There's so much. I feel like we haven't really touched on the racist parts of this book too, that I think are really awful, but I feel like listing them would just be awful to list. But is there anything you want to talk about in regards to that? I mean, as a Japanese background, coming to Australia, but English is your first language, and you kept being treated like this person who didn't understand what was happening. Which
again, I'm just like, how is this possible in the 2000s that this is still something that was happening, where people just presume.
It was bizarre how old-fashioned some of the stuff that you were quoting people are saying. I couldn't believe that they were actually saying it out loud.
I couldn't believe it either at the time. To be honest, I was like, what? Yeah, there's a scene in the book where a patient requests or didn't want me to treat them because I was not white. So that was really shocking to me, and I didn't know how to deal with it at the time. So I had to go and hide in a store cupboard to kind of, calm down and go back professionally, because I was thinking, wow, like someone actually just said that to me. They didn't want me to be their doctor because I'm yellow.
I know, and you just don't. I mean, you would hope. I mean, unfortunately, it's in Australia. We like to think of ourselves as being, not racist, but that is not correct. I remember being asked myself, like, so where were you born? And I was like, Australia. Like, where are you from? I'm like, Australia. Yeah, but where were you born? I'm like, Australia.
And
like,
they go, where were you born? Really from?
And I'm like, Camden. All right, Camden. That's where I was born, Camden Hospital. And people just not, just taking.
Oh, it's absolutely. My family's from Egypt, and I do not look like I am. And so I just pass as a white man in a society that is very easy on white men. But, I see it with my brothers who look more Middle Eastern, and, constantly. I've been out with them where they have been asked, sitting next to them, where are you from?
Yeah.
And they don't know where they're from, because they could be from anywhere from the way they look. Yeah. They're just not from here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how well you speak English or anything else. It's just... It's horrible.
It can be awkward sometimes. It's very uncomfortable. Yeah. But I guess the worst part is when you think that it's affecting their perception of your
skill.
Your skill and the quality of the care that you can give. Sometimes they thought I was too young to be a doctor. Now, a lady surgeon, or
or nurse.
All the time. Even now, actually, I still get asked whether I'm a medical student or a nurse, and think, must be the Botox. I'm off that age now.
Yeah, I was going to say, it gets to a point where it actually becomes a compliment. But when you're actually trying to, show that you are the person
competent.
That's going to, operate on them and save their finger from, amputation.
Yeah, you don't want anyone to have any doubt in your skill. You want, you want the people who you're looking after to have absolute confidence in your care. So there were times like that where I felt like I was constantly having to prove myself, and that does get tiring after a while.
Yeah. And you also mentioned, the fact that technically, because you'd only been in Australia for the last couple of years of high school before you, went into university, that you were actually an international student.
I was.
And about, that's another level of sort of...
systemic racism, I guess.
About how international students are treated.
Yeah, we're just seen as money, You think, rich daddy's paying for your degree, and then you're going to take the degree back home to your home country. Yeah. So you're not kind of worth investing in, kind of thing. That's how I felt through medical school. So I hated the fact that I was an international student. I tried to hide that, actually, as much as possible. And lucky for me, like I sounded like an Aussie, so it was fine. But, other people who had much kind of stronger accents from their home country, I think were more prone to discrimination. So I would have imagined that they had a harder time than I did.
Yeah, and even more in the unfairness of the system of that, when you get chosen for your first round of jobs.
Yeah, yep.
And that the local students, and then, so that you missed out on a job because...
I did, I didn't get a job in New South Wales as an intern, so I ended up going to Melbourne.
Yeah, because of the way that you were technically an international student, so you were below someone else, even though your score was higher than someone else's. Yeah. It just seems...
Yeah, it's a system that from the outside you assume, as someone who knows nothing about it, is that it seems like it will be merit-based, because why would they ever choose doctors not based on that, because that would be crazy. They're looking after our lives.
Yeah,
And then you hear about it and you just, it's horrifying for so many reasons. But a big one is just like, it's not optimizing for the best possible doctors to look after us. That's why the system should exist, right? It's really, that part of it is very upsetting, I must say, as a potential patient.
Yeah, you want the best doctors, I guess, and you kind of have faith in this meritocracy, but it doesn't always happen like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like so many other things where, we peel back the layers of something that on the surface has a veneer of respectability, and then you kind of really see.
But you know what, Joel? Your surgeon will have an amazing handbag.
Or they'll be really attractive. Which is what you want,
on
really,
that depressing note, I feel like we can probably wrap up this wonderful podcast. I feel like we could keep talking about it. It's a fascinating book. I highly recommend, if you're listening, that you have a read. And for a very limited time, you'll be able to get some signed copies. So please, thank you so much, Yumiko, for coming. And Shanu. And thanks so much for listening. You can buy Emotional Female by Yumiko Kadota at booktopia.com.au.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.